All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Open Book Broadcast. I am Allie, your host, the right place, right time. I am super pumped to be doing another episode. I feel like it's been a minute since we've had our last guest. And just for any new viewers and listeners to the show, Open Book Broadcast is a place where I come together with industry professionals and talk about anything and everything writing and publishing. And we are an open book about it. I'm super pumped today to have Jenn T Grace with us to discuss hybrid publishing, integrity in the industry, and all kinds of other fun things that I know Jenn is going to share with us today. So Jenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us today.
And before we dive in, I want to let everybody know how freaking fantastic and brilliant you are by reading your official bio. So we have here with us today an award-winning author, nationally recognized speaker, and savvy publishing strategist. Jenn T Grace is the founder of Publish Your Purpose, the acclaimed hybrid publishing company that gives first-time authors the secrets to getting their books written, finding an eager audience, and marking their place in the publishing world. Publish Your Purpose is a certified B Corp social enterprise that meets the gold standard of socially and environmentally friendly business practices. Jenn leads ambitious authors through every aspect of writing, editing, and publishing so their book strategically aligns with their business objectives. Whether it's a business guide that shows the breadth of their expertise or an emotional memoir that takes readers deep into life's challenges, she helps authors articulate their purpose and fulfill their mission. Jenn has published the books of almost 200 business owners, entrepreneurs, speakers, and memoirists, so more diverse stories can exist in the world and her authors can make a positive impact and achieve the recognition and success they deserve. She is the author of 6 books, including her memoir, House on Fire. Jenn has been featured in Forbes, The Huffington Post, The Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. Jenn lives in Connecticut with her family and enjoys being outside with her son, kayaking, and admiring the birds and nature around her. All right. Woo! I feel like there are like 15 new questions that I could ask just based off your bio, but I'm going to try to stick to script. So first, just tell us a little bit more about yourself, not the business stuff, who is Jenn T Grace when the office door gets shut and you get to go home for the night?
That is surprisingly a hard question. That I could take that question in a lot of different directions. The direction I will take it in is what I'm actively doing right now, which is taking down Halloween decorations. It is November 8th, and because I am that much of a Halloween person, that it takes literally over a week to remove all of the things from my yard and my outside. So that is, I feel like just your average person who maybe not average in terms of loving of Halloween, but I have dozens upon dozens of skeletons that all need homes, and now my basement is just filled with heaps of skeletons all over the basement floor. So that is who I am, and I will say it's not in a dark like a gothic type of way. I only like happy skeletons, so I'm very particular about the types of skeletons I like, but. That is just a very random fun fact.
I love it. I feel like if somebody was to accidentally stumble upon your house and go into the basement, they could have multiple thoughts as to what's happening down there.
It would look a little alarming, yes, because it really is just a heap of skeletons stacked on top of each other while I figure out where I'm going to put them back into the closet.
Oh my gosh. I think you need to get boxes that are in the shapes of caskets just to make it all more, obscure and appealing.
Trust me, I've had that thought. I'm trying to rein it in.
Oh my gosh, I love it. My son is obsessed with Halloween, and anything to do with skeletons are his jam. So the two of you would get along beautifully.
My kindred spirits.
Oh, I love it. He would love the heap of skeletons hanging out in the basement. All right, so skeletons aside, what about the origin story of your business? How did you develop Publish Your Purpose? And, tell us a little bit about that journey along the way.
I will give you the abridged version. So I was a consultant around LGBTQ marketing communications with Fortune companies that did financial services and insurance. So you can track the layers of niche marketing here. And I did that for a number of years. And I had a lot of my clients who, were executives at these Fortune companies saying, when are you going to write a book? And I was like, I wasn't planning on it. Even though if I go back in time, like I definitely, as a child, wanted to write a book. Had no idea what it would be or that I would be doing this today. And so I just started writing books. And so I wrote one in 2012. I published it in 2013, another 14, 15, like my 6 books all kind of came out almost year after year, except for the memoir that came out a few years later. And in doing that, everyone in my network was like, oh, well, how did you know how to write a book? I'm like, I don't know. I figured it out. And they're like, well, how did you know how to hire a cover designer? I'm like, I don't know. I just found one. And so it just kept being these questions about how I wrote and published a book. And I was like, I don't know. I just figured it out. And so I started to realize that clearly not everyone had that same ability to just figure it out. And so I put together an online program back in 2015 where I was like, all right, I'm just going to put you in a group and I'm going to teach you how to do it. And so I gathered 7 people that I knew and I was like, here, I'm going to make it up as I go, but I promise you on the other side of this, you'll know how to publish a book. And I was like, and if not, I'll give you your money back. No big deal. In doing that, I had multiple people being like, this is so great, so informative, so helpful. However, I don't want to have the learning curve and have to do this myself. I just want to pay you to do it instead. And I was like, well, that wasn't my plan because I was still doing my consulting at the time. And I was like, oh, I'm going to create this online program. It's scalable, like really being intentional about it because my consulting wasn't scalable in that same way. And then before long, I had somebody very specifically say, hey, why don't you just start a publishing company? And I was like, oh my God, this is not what my plan was. And then I actually thought about it over a weekend and I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I should be doing. And so I started PYP in 2016 as a result of all those conversations in 2015. So that's the origin.
Oh my gosh. I feel like you're just like on fire. You're just like a woman on fire. Like you're like, oh, I wrote a book. So then I wrote a second one and I wrote a second one. So I wrote a third one. And then it was like 6 books later. And then I just started teaching people and then I made a business like, because in all honesty, I mean, 2015 wasn't really all that long ago. Mm-hmm. And now you're like 200 books into this thing. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. For clients, 200
which
books.
Which to me feels slow, which is kind of crazy.
Okay. Maybe our bars are just set differently. So let's talk though about how you landed on the name Publish Your Purpose. Like, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to your authors?
It actually started as purpose driven. Like that's the phrase I was going for in the beginning, but that phrase is trademarked. I found out very unfortunately because I had already named my company Purpose Driven Publishing, and I was using the tagline of Publish Your Purpose. So it was like Purpose Driven Publishing, Publish Your Purpose. And then I had to change it due to a cease and desist. And I had to do it literally like overnight. I had to rebrand my entire company overnight. And I struggled and I asked a couple of friends, I'm like, what should I name it? Like, I can't use purpose driven. And that's really the essence that I'm trying to attract, to get people who are purpose-driven people, impact-driven, mission-driven, people who are out to do amazing things in this world. And my banner happened to be right behind me. And my friend Bernadette was like, why don't you just give it Publish Your Purpose? You already have it on the banner. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's perfect. And so it has just a nice alliteration to it. And, we go by PYP most of the time for short because Publish Your Purpose is a tongue twister for a lot of people. But, I think it sets us apart and differentiates us from a publishing standpoint because a lot of publishers don't really care about the purpose of what someone's doing. A lot of them treat it as any other type of business, and they're not looking at the human side of it and kind of the bigger picture impact of what a story can actually do for someone and for a community of people. So I think having this name really attracts the right people for us, which is good.
Yeah. Do you find that your authors come in already feeling seen, heard, and valued, right? Because there's already like the expectation that like you are about purpose and impact. And so it's less of a hurdle for them. Like they already know that like you're going to get that they have something bigger they want to do with this book.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I feel like yes. I think sometimes I have conversations with people where the industry has beaten them down, whether they've tried to shop for get an agent to shop for a traditional deal and they've been rejected at every turn, whether they've been flat out told that their story, I don't want to say directly saying your story doesn't matter, is worthless, but it's statements like, oh, the story's been told, hundreds of times before. Like that's like a really terrible comment to be on the receiving end of when it's still your story and it's something personal to you. So I do have conversations where people have been kind of beaten down and they're just feeling deflated. And so, talking to us and seeing that their story is the center of everything. And that is really what matters. And it's not, we're not a publisher that is an assembly line where we're just trying to crank through as many authors as we can in a calendar year or in a publishing season. Like we really care about who we're working with for the long haul. And I know that a lot of times I'll have a conversation with somebody. It happened twice last week where I was the first person to see any of the stuff that they had written, like any of their manuscript. And I know that that's a privileged and private place to be able to kind of take on the weight of that person's emotions to say like, hey, this is, you're the first person who's seeing my words, because it's really scary as a first-time author when you don't know what people are going to say, or if your work is good, and you have all that kind of imposter syndrome and self-doubt that kind of creeps up. So I do think having the name that we have allows people to kind of come to the table and feel like they can be more vulnerable simply because they know that they are centered in our universe and how we operate, rather than being much more kind of corporate about it, which I find a lot of traditional publishing to be very, very corporate like.
Yeah. I feel like I was just having that conversation the other day with someone, a client or potential client, that there's a lot of transaction that seems to happen in the industry across all the different types of publishing. I think depending on the outfit, right, the actual way that business is structured or set up, that somewhere along the way, books are products, and as products, it just becomes this big machine, and we start to lose sight of that there's a person with a voice and an experience or a message, depending on what kind of genre, right, that is putting their whole selves into a body of work. And it happens to be that it's in a book, but I mean, it's no less meaningful because it's in a book, or because, as you use as an example, it's been done before. Well, everything's been done before. I mean, we've been around a while here. Like everything's been done before. So, new ideas, right? It's a new way of sharing an idea that's already been done, and you need it to have already been done, right? Or otherwise, how do you connect it to your reader? If you're trying to make sure that they feel something similarly, or that they resonate with what you're saying because they see themselves in your own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everything has been done before. But I think what this actually touches on is, and it's something that I speak a lot about, is when we are looking at traditional publishing settings, what their focus is to bring you on as an author and sell your book to their audience. So they're not focused on how to sell your book to your audience. So it doesn't matter that the same type of story has been told thousands of times, because it's still your story, your perspective, and your audience. So as long as you're focused on selling your book and providing value to the people that surround you, it doesn't matter if the story's been told millions of times before. But unfortunately, that's really kind of one of those markers that traditional publishing is looking at, is because they want to make money, right? They're a corporation. They want to make money. And the way to do that is to sell a lot of books. And the way to sell a lot of books is to have a mass appeal to their audience, not to your very niche and narrow audience. And I think that's where a lot of times, from an editing standpoint and a story structure standpoint and messaging, everything gets a little bit diluted when you kind of pursue that more corporate traditional path of publishing.
Yeah, I think too that there's still a lot of surprises for first-time authors, that because they see their book as this deep work of personal experience or emotion or thought or whatever, that the person that they're trying to sell it to in traditional publishing wouldn't necessarily see it as art or meaningful something, right? Like I think that they're taken aback by the fact that they're a number in a machine.
Yeah, and I think that's sad when we think about it, right? Because we're telling our story because we're trying to impact people. We're trying to impact a community. We're trying to help somebody not have to go through the same experiences that we went through, regardless of what it is. And then it's really deflating when you're like, wow, they don't actually care about my story at all. They just care about how much money they can make on me. Like, what a terrible feeling that is for anyone in any industry. But it seems especially crappy in publishing when we place so much value on the power of books, and yet that same power is not transferred to the author who's writing those books.
Yeah. So from your perspective then, how does hybrid publishing, which is what you consider a publisher purpose, right? How does hybrid publishing kind of compare, do you think? Or do you see similar things happening in the hybrid world, depending on who it is? Like, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a range. So if we look at just kind of a spectrum of the industry, we have traditional publishing, which everybody knows about. It's the Simon & Schuster's, the Penguin Random Houses of the world. And then there's a lot of other, like those are the big ones, right? And there's other big ones. And then there's a lot of other smaller traditional publishers, but that's their business model. And then you have self-publishing on the other extreme side. And that's when you're doing everything yourself. And hybrid publishing really just kind of fits squarely in the middle, where it's the support and services and expertise and team and community that you get from a traditional publisher, but expense and control and ownership and rights and all that of self-publishing. So I find hybrid publishing to really be, and of course I'm going to be biased because that's what my company does, but I find it to be the most advantageous for most authors, simply because if we look at traditional publishing with the goal of selling as many books as possible, they're taking a gamble. Like, it's really kind of like horse racing, right? Where they're taking a gamble on certain authors, and they want to attract authors that have big platforms and big audiences. Because when you have a big platform and a big audience, in theory, you should be able to sell and move a lot of books. And so they're going to want to take a chance on that type of author rather than the author who might have a 1,000 close followers, like 1,000 people that are amazing. 1,000 is not a number that any traditional publisher is going to take seriously, because they need you to have millions of followers or hundreds of thousands, depending, lots of variables there. And so I think it's it's just, as an author, we want to be empowered, and that's my goal for people, is to be empowered authors to make the right decision for them. Because for whatever reason, traditional publishing might make perfect sense for one person, and self-publishing might make sense for someone else, and hybrid might make sense for somebody else. So it really is an individualized experience and a custom kind of path to figure out which way you should go. But even with hybrid publishing, that is kind of like a mini spectrum of its own, where you have some hybrid publishers that are very assembly line, that will, and I wouldn't even put them as a hybrid publisher. I would call them more of a vanity press, which are the really predatory ones that don't really care about editorial quality or design quality or anything. They're just kind of churning books out because you're their customer. You as the author are their customer, not the people you're writing your book for. But I find that most hybrid publishers are operating with some level of integrity and ethics. However, we all do have different business models. So it's important to kind of compare the different models and decide what level of service you might be looking for. Like, are you looking for someone who's really committed to a long-term relationship with you? Or do you not care and you just kind of want to get the book out as quickly as you can? Those are going to be different types of companies that you'd want to explore.
Yeah. So why don't we, so I know you have a freebie that's the 9 questions to ask a publisher. And I'll put that into the comments for folks. So you're kind of touching on it right now about like how different publishers have different models and knowing kind of what you're looking for. So what are some of the things that a first-time author should really be considering when they're vetting their publishing prospects?
The 9 questions goes into like 9 really concrete questions that, range from what type of values does this publisher have, right? So if you are, and if for us as publisher purpose, right, we are focused on purpose. We have a huge focus on equity and inclusion and making sure that we are helping make sure that all voices have a seat at the table. And so for us, that's going to attract certain people, and it might also deter certain people, right? So some people, like, shockingly enough, there are plenty of people in this world that don't believe inclusion is a good thing. I can't wrap my head around it. It makes no sense to me, but there's plenty of people that doesn't make sense for them. And so obviously in that case, we wouldn't be a right fit. So you want to like do your due diligence to say, okay, do I want to be working with a company that has a commitment to sustainable practices or a commitment to the environment? Because that's important to me. Great. You can find companies like mine that's a B Corp, and that is kind of the gold standard in terms of sustainability in business practices. But the other questions are like, what's the editing process look like? right? So some publishers have a really concrete, in-depth editing process, and for us, we're all about elevating. Whatever you bring to us, we're going to make it better. Other publishers, you could be lucky if they do a proofread on it, and then your book gets out to the world and it's littered with typos, and now it's doing more damage to your brand than it's doing good. And so it's things like that, and it ranges. And there's nine questions, and even under the questions, there's kind of sub questions in there too. But I would say the number one takeaway, even if you didn't want to go and download the document, is to read the contract, read the fine print. And I know just the thought of reading the fine print of something will make your eyes water, glaze over. You're tuning off now. You're like, I'm not even listening to this conversation anymore. But the fine print in publishing is the most important thing to pay attention to, because that is where everything is tucked in sneakily, that you don't know what you've signed until it's too late. And so that is my one big takeaway, is just to read the fine print. Just make sure you're not, get it. Because, a book is long-term. It's not like your book is just out for 6 months and then disappears. Like, it is here forever. And so you want to make sure that you and your book are protected for the longevity and for the long run.
Or to know, what in terms of like time frame or length or whatever, to understand, is there an end date for when that contract with that publisher ends, right? Like, you get X, Y, or Z until, or, contract needs to be renegotiated at a certain point, when your book becomes 3 years old, like, are they still gonna be having it up on the website and searchable? So I think that there's a lot of things that just around time, right, should be asked and made sure that it's understood. And if it's not in the contract, like, to really ask those questions and make sure then you have something in writing, right? Like, I kind of feel like, as much as I hate reading legalese and I hate really long contracts, I would rather the contract that has all of the T's crossed and I's dotted and super specificity around what I'm getting or what they're getting or whatever it is, than something that's very vague and leaves a lot to be questioned later.
Yeah, you're better off hiring a lawyer. And I know sometimes it stinks to think about, I'm already having to put out, I already have to make this investment and get my book done. Now you're saying I have to go out and spend more money on an attorney to look at this contract. They can look at them relatively quickly. It's not a huge investment to have an intellectual property attorney look at the contract, and it will save you a lot of time and headache and pain down the road by just having taken that extra step. And I encourage all of our authors to do that. And even, when, like, I had an author who signed the contract like right away. Like, I sent it through, our secure signing system, and it came back within like an hour. And I'm like, I'm feeling pretty confident you probably didn't look at this. I was like, so can we have a conversation where you actually look at the contract, so that way you know what you're getting? Because I want to make sure that they're empowered and everything is above board, right? And I don't have anything in there that we're hiding, so that way I'm like, here, show it with everybody. But sometimes, like, I just want to make sure, because so often that's where people really get taken advantage of. And I've had a lot of friends get taken advantage of. And then they'll come to me and say, hey, I got into this contract with, and there's a couple of them that surface often, which I'm not a namer here, but there's a couple of them out there that are notoriously predatory. And then I'll get a contract from a friend with him being like, hey, can you just look at this? And I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, what did you sign? And it like hurts my heart. And then I have to like try to figure out a plan with them. And I have been able to help a couple of people get out of these really crappy contracts, but that's not always the case, right? Because you have to know what the loopholes are to get you out of them. And if you don't, you're kind of trapped.
Right. So what would be some signs for first-time authors to be looking for? Like, what would be good signs of, like, alert, like, don't go forward, what are some of the characteristics of a predatory publisher?
I would say there's probably two things that I would say specifically. The big one really, and I will put the caveat with this, is that this is just a different type of business model in some cases. So there are a lot of predatory models that use this, where you will sign a contract and you are so excited because this publisher has taken interest in you, and that's where they can kind of prey on your emotions, which is another layer of crappy, in my opinion. But you're like, okay, they're going to do this for $1,500. They're going to do this for $3,000. They're going to do it for some smaller number, compared to looking at publishers like myself and plenty of others in the level that we're publishing at, which is usually, it could be from 18,000 to like 50,000, right? So there's a lot of publishers that are in that huge range. And so they'll look at that and say, wow, I'm looking at Jenn's contract. Hers was 20,000. This one's going to be able to do it for free. And on the surface, it kind of looks like I get all the same things. Now, if you're not really spending the time to do a direct comparison, that's problem number one. You really need to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. But that contract really isn't 3,000. It's probably 23,000. You just don't know it yet. And what happens is that a lot of these publishers will tuck in minimum order requirements. And this is one of the most predatory practices that there are. And so you sign for 3,000, you're super excited. And then you realize that before the release of the book, you as the author have to order 2,000 copies from the publisher, and they're charging you $10 a piece. The book might cost $4 to print, but they're marking that book up to $10. So now that's another $20,000 in book inventory that you are responsible for before they will release your book into the market. So now that 3,000 you were super excited about is 23,000, when you could have went with somebody like Publisher Purpose or plenty of others of us that are operating with integrity, not have to buy any minimums and have been less. And so that is something that is always, and it's right there in the contract. Like it is there, it is right there for you to find. You just have to know to go look for it. And it's not to say that if a company has a minimum order requirement, that is a bad thing, because there are plenty of companies that do, but it's the amount of integrity and transparency that they're operating with, because they will just flat out and say, yes, in addition, upon release of your book, we have a minimum requirement of 500 books or 1,000 books, then you know. But when it's tucked into a contract and they don't tell you about it, they're praying and hoping that you don't look at the contract, and then you signed it and now you have absolutely no recourse to it whatsoever. That to me is like the biggest red flag that there is out of all of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, like it's one thing to say, as you pointed out, it's 3,000 for these things, but then expect X number of dollars for the minimum purchase requirement of, some number of copies. I mean, just the thought of like 2,000 copies of my book, like where would I put them? Like I would have to then go rent out like a separate storage locker just to hold, that many books. Which is why I really like the print on demand models that we're seeing a lot right now, where everybody's just printing what's been ordered versus having this large overstock of them. Or allowing the author to choose the amount of copies that they feel is reasonable for them to have, at the outset when they hit the publishing date, right? That they can then sell directly.
Yeah.
So those are some great things for people to be looking for. And I think that you're really hitting the nail on the head to just say, like, you need to not only look at the contract yourself and do what you can to decipher it, but you need to have legal eyes on it as well. And really understand like what it's saying, what your responsibilities are, what theirs are. And then of course the other thing that you said too that I think is really, really valuable, right, is like compare apples to apples. Like, just saying, oh, they're both hybrid publishers, but one costs this and the other costs that, isn't a fair comparison unless they're legitimately providing the exact same service, every single time. And of course, even then, right, like you can provide the same thing, but the quality of it can be different, right? Like two hybrid publishing companies could say, oh yeah, we're going to do a press release for your book, right? But one person's press release could be like gold star, and the other person's press release could be shitty, to be quite frank, right? Like not done well at all. And so both are providing a press release, but that doesn't mean that their quality is the same, right?
Exactly.
So even when you think that you could be getting, tit for tat, it's also very possible that one's going to do it better.
Absolutely.
Right?
And
Right.
I would say for this is the support. That's the thing that's hard to quantify and hard to compare when you're looking from proposal to proposal, is the amount of support that you'll receive. So those are good questions to ask too, of like, like if I have a question, how does this question get answered? Because there's a lot of publishers, again, that they're moving people at a really rapid rate through a process where they're using help desk tickets, right? And so you can't actually physically get on the phone with anybody. Whereas you have other publishers like myself, where we will get on the phone with any of our authors at any time for any reason, no matter what it is that they need. And whether they published with us 6 years ago or whether they're publishing with us at this very moment, it doesn't matter. We're accessible, and we're accessible through the whole process. But there's a lot of I've had some authors who've gone off and done like a children's book with a different publisher or like a poetry book with a different publisher, because we don't do those things. And they'll come back and say, oh my God, I had no idea how good I had it with you until I went to this other model and realized that we communicate just via email for help desk. Like I can't, like I have these really strategic questions and I can't get them answered. And I'm like, it's just a different business model. It's not saying that publisher is right or wrong. It's just a different business model. And you need to know what you're getting into from the start. It's as simple as that.
So I think one thing then, right, for people to consider who are watching and listening to this, right, is understanding how you like to collaborate or how you like to learn, right? If you know that you're somebody who wants hand-holding, white glove service, like, you want somebody who's going to be responsive on the other side, those are things that you should be looking for in your publisher. And when you go to meet with people, to interview them, as your possible prospect, right, ask them about how they are with their communication, their people skills, their relationships. And I think the other thing, Jen, that you would probably suggest, right, is that they actually ask for references or other people who have published with that house.
Absolutely. Yep. I was talking to somebody last week and she's like, do you mind if I talk to people? I'm like, oh my God, yes, please. The challenging part of that is like, how many times can you bother your authors to be like having calls with people? So we have a whole library of testimonials for people to review as well. But when that request comes up, the answer should be an enthusiastic yes. And I even said to her, I'm like, you could randomly cold call any one of the authors on our website and ask them their experience with us. And I feel confident that it's going to be a positive one, because we really focus on making sure that is everybody's unique experience, because it's just so, you hear horror stories in every direction of people who had a really bad publishing experience. And I'm like, why can't we just as an industry just get our shit together and collectively be better for authors? It really bothers me. And fortunately, there's a small kind of group of us that are underfoot, that are really operating with integrity and trying to help kind of right the ship that this industry has such a terrible reputation for. But, it comes back to authors being empowered and authors having the same level of power and not having this really weird dynamic where you as the author somehow feel like you're at a disadvantage simply because they're a publisher, and that somehow the publisher holds all of the cards and all of the weight and power, when really they don't need to. That was the case before. It's not the case now. Like, you have many, many options. It's just a matter of taking the time to explore those options.
Yep. So the other thing too for people would be look for a publisher, or any service professional you're going to use, right, really to work on a book. Your cover designer, your line editor, right? If you're piecing those things together yourselves and not going with the press that offers all of those things, right, is like, make sure that you've got people who are willing to educate along the way. Because then you're going to feel more informed, more empowered to make decisions around your book, and not have it be like somebody else is calling the shots simply because you don't know the questions to ask or you're not familiar with the industry, right? Okay, let's talk briefly about your memoir, and then we'll tell people where to go and hang out with you. So obviously you've got multiple books, but one, House on Fire, Finding Resilience, Hope and Purpose in the Ashes. So tell us a little bit about you as a memoirist.
Oh, yes. So the short story is that I have written 4 nonfiction books, a mental health journal, this book, and now I'm working on a book about how to write a book. So that will be number 7. And I have worked with a lot of authors. We published almost 200 books, but we have a writing program that's a 6-month intensive where we help people get the idea out of their head and get a manuscript on paper. We refer authors to people like yourself for support. And so we work with a lot of authors and see a lot of different things. And what I realized was, number one, selfishly, my own story was like an albatross around my neck, where I felt suffocated by my own story some days. But on top of it, I realize I'm coaching a lot of memoir writers, probably less now than we were before. And I felt like I needed to go through that same experience that I put our memoir writers through. And so it is not a fun experience, I will tell you that. And I knew it wasn't a fun experience prior to doing it myself, but then it was like a whole other layer of hell in its own way. And I am very grateful I did it, but it gives me, like, really one of the main purposes was to just get it out there, because I was tired of having to explain things to people. And then secondarily, be able to relate to my authors on an even deeper level, to be like, listen, like, and I give my book away to our authors all the time, where I'll say, like, go read it, go listen to it, then let's have a conversation. Because when we're talking about, like, you're saying that I'm making you go too deep in your story, go listen to mine, because I spared no, I did not sugarcoat anything. I was so raw and so exposing to a degree that still makes me uncomfortable to this day, and it's been out for 2 years. That when they see it, they're like, "Oh my god!" And so then it's almost like giving them permission to go even deeper with their work. So that was really kind of the big motivation behind doing it, and I'm very grateful that I did.
Good. I'm so happy that you did. I can't wait to check it out. I'm a huge fan of memoir. That's kind of my jam. That's where I like to live and play. So I'm always curious about how people's memoirs came to be, what their process was. And Jenn, you pretty much captured it. It is like, it's beautiful, but it's also a little bit like hell, like at the same time, when you're hitting up those really raw moments or messy moments in life, which pretty much memoirs are made of. So I dropped the link to this particular book into the comments. Some of your other books will be listed in the notes on the YouTube channel with the video. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience about something coming up, or where to connect with you?
Great questions. So they can just head over to publishyourpurpose.com. All of our stuff is there. As I feel like I've probably alluded to as we've been talking, we are very, very focused on education and empowerment to, like, really just make sure our authors just have as much information about this process as they can. As a result, we have a lot of resources on our website that range from that 9 questions to ask. We have one that's called the Book Cost Blueprint, which really kind of goes through what pricing looks like. We have a 30-day writing challenge. So if someone's stuck and they want to know how to, like, get their writing kind of kickstarted in the right direction, it's a 30-day challenge. And they're all free resources, because for me, a huge piece of what we want to do is just elevate and amplify voices that are not always heard. And sometimes those voices don't have the resources or means to access certain programs. And so for us, we try to package as many things as we can that are free resources that can really help somebody get themselves in the exact right direction they need to be able to be in a place that they can really tell their story. So I have more resources than I could possibly ever explain. So Publish Your Purpose is the best place to do it. And then I'm on all the socials at Jenn T Grace, and it's Jenn with 2 N's.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks, Jenn, for being here with us today, folks. We're going to be back on Tuesday, November 22nd with another guest. I'm excited about who we're bringing on next, so tune in then. And keep your eyes peeled on all the things from the Right Place, Right Time, especially on LinkedIn, because this month I am running a workshop called Please Pass the Mashed Potatoes, a gratitude workshop for aspiring memoirists. So we're getting geared up for turkey time, and we're going to have a little bit of fun using this metaphor as we have some gratitude for messy moments and get our heads on straight when it comes to writing memoirs. So be on the lookout for when registration opens. I would love to see you all there. And in the meantime, you can always visit therightplacerightTime.com. So that concludes today's episode of Open Book Broadcast, and we hope that you enjoyed it. Bye for now.